Uncertainty is not weakness. It is the highest form of intellectual honesty. What if the bravest thing a human mind can do is look at the most terrifying questions in existence? Does God exist? What happens after death? Why is there something rather than nothing? And instead of grabbing the nearest comfortable answer, say with complete calm, I don't know. The entire civilization has been built on the desperate need for certainty. Religions, ideologies, political movements, all of them, at their psychological core, are factories manufacturing certainty for terrified minds. But here is what the deepest scientific thinking reveals. Uncertainty is not a bug in the system of knowledge. It is the feature that makes real knowledge possible. The moment you are absolutely certain, you stop looking, you stop questioning, you fossilize. And a fossilized mind, no matter how confidently it speaks, is a dead mind. The scientists who changed the world, every single one, were people who were comfortable not knowing while everyone around them demanded answers. They sat with the discomfort. They let the mystery breathe. And from that discomfort, genuine discovery was born. To say, I don't know, with sincerity and continue investigating anyway, that is not doubt. That is the most radical, most courageous, most intellectually alive position a human being can occupy. The universe doesn't need to be magical, to be miraculous. What if I told you that the more science reveals about reality, the stranger, the more beautiful, and the more incomprehensible it becomes, not less, and that anyone who thinks scientific understanding removes wonder from the universe has simply never understood science deeply enough? A flower is not less beautiful when you understand photosynthesis. It is more beautiful because now you understand that sunlight is being converted into living architecture through a chemical process so elegant it makes the greatest human engineering look like child's crayon drawings. A rainbow is not diminished when you understand refraction. It becomes a window into the behavior of light itself, into the electromagnetic spectrum, into quantum interactions happening at scales no human eye will ever directly witness. The night sky stops being a painting and becomes a time machine. Every star you see is a message from the past. Some of those stars already dead for millions of years, their light still traveling toward your eye, like a letter that was mailed before your species existed. Science does not drain the universe of awe. Science reveals that reality, actual, physical, measurable reality, is so profoundly strange, so layered with depth, so excessive in its complexity, that no myth, no legend, no religious narrative has ever come close to capturing how genuinely astonishing existence actually is. Believing something because it comforts you is not the same as it being true. What if the single most dangerous sentence in the history of human thought is, I believe it because it gives me peace? Comfort and truth are two completely separate territories. They occasionally overlap, but only by accident. The history of human progress is essentially a long, painful, glorious story of people discovering that the comfortable explanation was wrong, and that the true explanation, though initially terrifying, ultimately delivered something far more valuable than comfort: understanding. People were comfortable believing the earth was the center of the universe. It felt right. It felt meaningful. It made humanity feel special and protected. And it was spectacularly, demonstrably, cosmically incorrect. People were comfortable believing disease was punishment from gods. Entire civilizations organized medicine around supernatural causes, while people died of infections that could have been prevented by washing hands. The brain is a prediction machine with a powerful built-in bias. It prefers familiar over accurate, and it prefers meaningful over true. This is not a moral failing, it is a survival mechanism. But survival mechanisms are designed for the savannah, not the laboratory. When you are trying to understand reality, actual reality, you must be willing at every step to follow the evidence, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. The difference between myth and science is that science is willing to be wrong. What if the most powerful words in the entire English language, more powerful than any prayer, any declaration, any manifesto, are simply, the evidence suggests I was wrong. Let me revise. This is not a weakness. This is the engine of all human advancement. Every technology you use, every medical treatment that has ever saved a life, every structural calculation that keeps a bridge standing, every algorithm running your phone exists because someone somewhere was willing to discard a beautiful, deeply held belief when the data contradicted it. Religion and science are not enemies because they ask different questions. They are in tension because they have different relationships with being wrong. A scientific theory that cannot be proven wrong is not a scientific theory, it is a belief. And beliefs, no matter how ancient, no matter how culturally sacred, no matter how emotionally loaded, cannot be granted immunity from examination. The most honest intellectual position is not atheism. It is not faith. It is the willingness to say, here is what the evidence currently supports, here is what it doesn't, here is what I genuinely do not know, and I will follow the data wherever it goes, even if it goes somewhere I never expected. That position, uncomfortable, rigorous, endlessly questioning, has done more for actual human flourishing than any doctrine ever written. All without explanation is beautiful. All with understanding is transcendent. What if the reason so many people resist scientific thinking is not that it destroys wonder, but that they are afraid it will, because no one ever showed them what real scientific wonder actually feels like? There is a profound difference between the awe that comes from mystery and the awe that comes from comprehension. When you don't understand something, you fill the gap with story, with symbol, with narrative, and those narratives can be beautiful. But when you do understand something, truly, mechanistically, mathematically understand it, the beauty that emerges is of an entirely different order. Consider quantum mechanics. A single electron traveling through two slits simultaneously, not metaphorically, literally, interfering with itself like a wave, then landing like a particle, defying every classical intuition about the nature of matter and reality. No religion has ever proposed anything as genuinely strange. No mythology has ever invented something as truly bizarre as the confirmed, laboratory-tested behavior of the universe at its most fundamental scale. When you sit with that, when you actually let it land, something breaks open in the mind. Not despair, not nihilism, pure, overwhelming, ego-dissolving awe. The universe is not less than what the poets imagined. It is more, immeasurably, terrifyingly, beautifully more. Not knowing what happens after death is not tragic. Pretending you do is. What if the most honest, the most courageous, and ultimately the most liberating thing you could do with the question of your own mortality is simply refuse to lie to yourself about it? Death is the great certainty that every human tradition, every religious system, every philosophical school has attempted to manage through narrative. And those narratives have done something genuinely important. They have helped billions of people get out of bed in the morning. But there is a cost. When the narrative about afterlife becomes more real to people than the life actually happening in front of them, when people make decisions about this life based entirely on rewards and punishments in a speculated next one, something deeply important gets lost. The present moment becomes a waiting room. The actual physical, irreplaceable experience of being alive, of tasting food and feeling sunlight and laughing until it hurts and loving people who will also one day be gone, gets subordinated to a story about somewhere else. What if this life, right now, exactly as it is, full of uncertainty and loss and beauty and confusion, is the whole thing, not a rehearsal, not a test, not a corridor, the destination? That possibility, rather than being terrifying, can be the most ferociously motivating, most deeply humbling, most alive-making idea a human mind has ever encountered. What if the most honest sentence any human being has ever spoken, the sentence that has done more for the advancement of knowledge than any sacred text, any divine revelation, any ancient wisdom tradition, is simply, quietly, and without apology, I don't know. I want to tell you something that may be uncomfortable. And I want to ask you to sit with that discomfort, not run from it, not immediately reach for the nearest reassuring narrative to make it go away, but actually sit with it. Because in that discomfort, if you can bear it, something remarkable becomes possible. We live in a civilization that is deeply, almost pathologically allergic to uncertainty. We have built institutions, some of them extraordinarily old, some of them enormously powerful, whose primary function is to manufacture certainty for people who cannot tolerate not knowing. And I understand why. The questions that haunt human consciousness are genuinely terrifying. Why does anything exist? What is the nature of consciousness? What happens to the pattern of information that constitutes you, your memories, your personality, your particular way of laughing, when your body stops functioning? Is there a meaning built into the structure of things? Is there something watching? These are not small questions. They are the largest questions available to a human mind. And I want to be absolutely clear with you about where I stand. I do not know the answers. Neither do you. And neither does anyone who has ever lived. The difference is, some people are willing to admit that, and some people are not. Now here is where it gets extraordinary, because this is the thing that most people who reject scientific thinking have never truly been shown. They imagine that scientific understanding is cold, reductive, that it takes a sunset and turns it into wavelengths, takes love and turns it into neurochemistry, takes the night sky and turns it into a physics lecture, that it diminishes things. They are magnificently, completely, almost heroically wrong. Let me show you what I mean. A flower, an ordinary flower, the kind that grows in the crack of a sidewalk without anyone planting it or tending to it or giving it permission to exist, is absorbing photons of light and using that energy to break apart water molecules and carbon dioxide, and is reassembling those atoms into sugars, into cell walls, into pigment, into the precise geometric structures that constitute its petals. This process has been running on this planet for approximately 3 billion years. It preceded every animal. It preceded every nervous system. It was photosynthesizing long before there was anything on Earth capable of noticing that it was beautiful. Does knowing that make the flower less beautiful? Or does it shatter you with a beauty so much larger than the pretty object in front of you that you realize you were barely touching the surface of what was actually there? This is what understanding does. Not diminish, expand. Now, let us talk about God. I am not going to insult your intelligence by pretending this is a simple topic. It is not. Billions of people across every culture, every century, every level of education and circumstance have found meaning, comfort, purpose, and genuine moral guidance from the belief that the universe was intentionally created by a mind that cares about them. I am not here to mock that. I am not here to dismiss the psychological reality of religious experience. I am here to be honest. And honesty requires me to say the following clearly. I cannot believe something simply because believing it would make me feel better. That is not intellectual honesty. That is wish fulfillment dressed in the clothing of metaphysics. The history of human understanding is a long, beautiful, sometimes violent story of the comfortable explanation being wrong. Not occasionally, not rarely, systematically. We were certain the earth was the center. We were certain disease was divine punishment. We were certain that lightning was wrath, that epilepsy was possession, that the diversity of species was eternal and fixed. Every single one of these certainties, held with complete conviction, defended with enormous cultural authority, collapsed under the weight of evidence. And every single time, the people defending the comfortable answer called the people following the evidence dangerous. Now, and this is important, I am not saying that because previous beliefs were wrong. All beliefs are wrong. That would be its own form of sloppy thinking. I am saying something more precise. The method matters more than the conclusion. A belief held because of evidence, revised when evidence changes, that is knowledge. A belief held because it is comforting, protected from revision no matter what evidence emerges, that is something else. And we should be honest about what to call it. Let me tell you what actually keeps me awake at night. Not existential dread, not the fear of meaninglessness. What keeps me awake, in the best possible way, is this. A single electron fired at a barrier with two slits will pass through both slits simultaneously, not one or the other, both. It will interfere with itself like a wave, and then arrive at the detector as a particle. And the moment you try to observe which slit it went through, the moment you look, the interference pattern disappears. Reality, at its most fundamental measurable level, is altered by observation. No creation story has ever proposed anything that strange. No religious text, no matter how poetically written or culturally beloved, has ever come close to describing something as genuinely, head-meltingly bizarre as the confirmed, peer-reviewed, laboratory-reproduced behavior of the universe at the quantum scale. The universe is not merely stranger than you imagine. It is stranger than you are capable of imagining. And that fact, that single, verifiable, peer-reviewed fact, is the most awe-inspiring thing I have ever encountered. Now let's talk about death, because eventually we must. Every major religion, every spiritual tradition, every culture in human history has produced a narrative about what happens after you die. These narratives differ wildly in their content: paradise, reincarnation, judgment, dissolution into a cosmic whole. But they share one structural feature. They are all, without exception, attempts to make the undeniable certainty of death psychologically survivable. And that is a genuinely human thing to do. I am not dismissing it. But here is what I believe. With as much honesty as I can summon, I do not know what happens after death. The evidence available to the living about the experience of the dead is essentially zero. And I refuse, as a matter of intellectual self-respect, to paper over that gap with a story, no matter how beautiful the story is, no matter how old, no matter how many billions of people have found it comforting. Because here is the alternative, and it is extraordinary. What if this is it? What if this life, right now, today, with all its confusion and loss and joy and Tuesday afternoons and the particular way light falls through a window in the early morning, is not a corridor, not a waiting room, not a test? What if it is the destination? not as a conclusion that diminishes life, as a conclusion that electrifies it. Every conversation becomes unrepeatable. Every person you love becomes irreplaceable in a way that no theology has ever fully captured, because no theology has ever been willing to say that this is the whole thing, that there is no next chapter to correct the mistakes of this one, that the present moment is not preparation for something else, but is itself the point. That is not nihilism. That is the opposite of nihilism. That is the most ferociously alive, most deeply motivating, most urgently present way of existing that I have ever been able to imagine. The universe has been running for approximately 13.8 billion years. Stars have formed and collapsed. Galaxies have collided. Elements have been forged in the cores of dying suns. Your atoms, the carbon in your body, were manufactured in stellar explosions billions of years before this planet existed. You are, in the most literal sense available to language, made of star stuff. And through some process that we understand partially but not completely, through chemistry becoming biology, biology becoming neurology, neurology becoming consciousness, you are here, briefly, impossibly, awake, and you have the extraordinary privilege available to almost nothing else in the known universe of knowing that you exist. The question is not whether there is a God watching that. The question is what you are going to do with the time you have while you are this rare, this brief, this awake. The most radical act available to a human mind is not faith, and it is not atheism. It is honesty. The willingness to look at the biggest questions reality presents, the origin of the universe, the nature of consciousness, the experience of death, the possibility of meaning, and engage with them as they actually are, rather than as we need them to be. You will not find certainty at the end of that inquiry. You will find something better. You will find questions so beautiful, so deep, so inexhaustibly strange, that the act of asking them becomes its own form of transcendence. The universe does not need your belief to be magnificent. It is magnificent in every atom, in every quantum interaction, in every star living its silent life 100 trillion miles away from anyone who will ever name it. Your job, the only job that has ever mattered, is to be awake to it, curious, honest, relentlessly, joyfully, alive to it. That is enough. That has always been enough. And for this brief, brilliant, improbable moment, it is yours.